Today I'm going to be talking to you about really Robert Hartman before IES. This is before he decided to chase the good. And so I think that what's going to happen, I hope that you will get some insights to his thinking and how in fact he was led to study axiology. Nicolai Hartmann was a German philosopher. He lived from 1882 to 1950, so he was alive when Robert Hartman was. They were not associates, but Nicolai Hartmann was a mentor to Robert Hartman. He taught at the University of Berlin. He was there during the Third Reich, which is in opposition to Robert Hartman, who had to leave Germany because he voiced his opposition to Hitler and he feared for his life. So this gentleman sort of kept a low profile. And he was not in any way in any favor of Hitler, but he wasn't in danger of being arrested. Okay. He is a top-rated philosopher, and in Europe he would be more famous than Robert Hartman. He wrote a pretty important book to Robert Hartman called Ethics, which is a mere 800 pages long. I think the table of contents itself is 40 pages, just to give you an idea. It's quite something. But that's just one of the things he wrote. He wrote quite a few things. There is a Nicolai Hartmann Society, and I am now a proud member, as of this year, of the Nicolai Hartmann Society. So Robert Hartman got me hooked on Nicolai Hartmann when I went back to read. And I spoke at their conference in Poland in June, and part of my mission to go there was to tell them who Robert Hartman was and to meet the European contingent of axiology and see how they felt about this whole subject area. Even though Nicolai Hartman wrote a book called Ethics, if you were to open up the ethics book, a great deal of it would be axiology, which gives you a hint what's to come. Robert Hartman was a major influence, it's no secret. His PhD dissertation was titled, "Can Field Theory be Applied to Ethics?" which was followed in 1948 by The Moral Situation, A Field Theory in Ethics. Notice the similarity in titles there. In the structure of value, if you were to look in the structure of value at chapter 3 in the beginning, you would notice there's a very long quotation at the beginning of that, and it's from Nicolai Hartman. In Robert Hartman's, which Nick Cliff has referred to as my work, in there he says he studied Nicolai Hartman assiduously. So this man, and the more I learned, the more influence I saw. There's a lot to be known about this, obviously, but I'm going to keep it really simple for you. I'm going to focus on just two key concepts today. Better to know a little bit of, understand these two things better. One is called the finalistic nexus. The finalistic nexus was very important to Robert Hartman. His PhD thesis was based in large part on this piece of teaching. And also we're going to learn about the relationship between ethics and axiology, those two branches of philosophy. So to begin with, what happened was Nicolai Hartman, when he's writing, he uses a lot of terms, poles and spheres and tension between them. So if you're a physics type person, that kind of reminds you of field theory, right? That's going to kind of stimulate those nerve cells in your brain. And it was that Robert Hartman picked up on. So Robert Hartman, in his thinking, said, hey, maybe I should treat this branch of philosophy using physical field theory. And maybe that would help me make it more scientific. Okay? So this is the finalistic nexus. It's a process that we all go through each day. This is the way things are, the is of life. This is what we think it ought to be. Okay? This is the tension between those two, what's pulling you towards the ought. But that's just step one. Step two of this process is we then say, well, what's the path that I can construct to get from here to there? So that would be step two of this. And step three would be the actual implementation of moving from the is to the ought. So if you stop and think about it, this process is in a way scientific. It's something that we can identify. We all live it each day, really, when you stop and think about it. So this is a diagram that really shows what we do each day with many things. Now, when you look at the situation, this is sort of a one-slide summary of an entire article, or at least 50% of it. So what I'm going to teach you right now is what Robert Hartman called a moral agent and an ethicist. So what the way this field theory stuff works is, you picture an ideal field, ethical field in space, where everything's hunky-dory, right? And then you pick a section out of that, and it could be in great conflict with normal ethics. And so what I have here is a concentration camp. So you'll notice that the field lines in that concentration camp don't quite line up with the beautiful normal ethical field lines. So this is what Robert Hartman refers to in his thesis as a moral situation. So we got a bad situation going on here. And if we look at this, we put a moral agent within that situation. So I'm going to use an example, Maximilian Kolbe. So Maximilian Kolbe was put into this environment. So what I want to do is use Maximilian. He's in a really bad ethical situation, but he's a very great moral agent. So what happened with him was a group of prisoners tried to escape from Auschwitz, and 10 of them, and they were caught, and they were brought back into the compound. And the punishment was they were going to be put into a room and starved to death. So one of the prisoners shouted out, "My wife, my family, this is horrible." So there was a priest in the crowd, and he heard this man cry out, and he said, "I will take his place. Kill me, not him." Pretty amazing, huh? And they did. They put these men in a room for 10 days. And they all died of starvation, except for Maximilian Kolbe. And they finally gave him a lethal injection because they wanted to use the room for something else. So he died praying. Maximilian Kolbe is a saint. He was brought into sainthood. So that's a pretty dramatic thing. So in this situation here, the moral agent in this situation, what Hartman is saying, that was an example of moral agent, but what an ethicist is the person who cares about the situation itself. He's the one that goes in and changes this bad situation. So this is a bad situational field within an ethical field, and this really represents changing the world when you stop and think about it, right? This is Robert Hartman's recipe for changing the world. Not to simply be a great moralist in a situation that you're in, but to change that situation, right? So that would be the ethicist part. That's his definition. To contrast that, I thought, and just to drive the whole thing home, I put a hospital over here. That's about pretty much different than a concentration camp. So we have all our ethical lines still, we have the ideal, but now inside the hospital things are pretty cool. We have a lot of good ethics going on, a good moral situation. But let's just do just the opposite. If you go back in time, you might recall reading in the newspaper where there was a male nurse who killed 21 patients in a hospital, right? These things are very shocking to us because that is an example of a person in a moral situation who's an immoral agent, right? So does everybody have the feeling for the moral agent and the ethicist? Go ahead.
Okay, so is the slight movement in the situational, is that more reflective of the fact that there wouldn't be a field hospital if they're not war?
So the last part of what you said I didn't hear.
Could it be that the slight distortion is because there would not be a field hospital if not for...
Well, this field is not to refer to a field hospital.
Okay.
So this could be a hospital downtown in Salt Lake City, and so the term field is being used in a, no, that's okay. It is not it is a field hospital could be there too. It doesn't matter. So war is not. But the reason I had the lines not quite lined up with the perfect, because there's really not anything that's perfect, okay? Because that's a perfectly ideal field. So this is very important to Robert Hartman. Robert Hartman wanted to make this into a science. He wanted to make this into a science. So let's try to make this into a science and compare it to a normal field. So for a normal field, let's say I had two masses and I had a gravitational field between those two masses, right? So Robert Hartman, what he did was he said, hey, I could take that and I can make that into a science, right? I have these two objects here. And if I study the field between them, I can determine their behavior, ethical behavior. And I could unlock and make ethics more scientific. But there's a problem. And Robert Hartman points out this problem, is that in the case of ethics, this is a given. It's the is. This is the is. But this is an ought. It's imaginary. It's not real. So how do we get to, this is part of being human. This ought, how do we get to it? And therein lies the problem with making ethics into a science. Because, and if you look at philosophy, it's called Hume's guillotine, where it's just called a fact-value dichotomy. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before or not. This is a dilemma, right? We got a real problem here. We're having trouble making this into a science because this step here could be considered subjective, right? So what does he do? What does he say to himself? The question of getting from here to here depends on what? The person's values. Who the observer is and what their value system is determines this ought. So what does that tell Robert Hartman? If he's going to make a science, the first science he has to deal with is axiology, not ethics. So the science of axiology underlies the science of ethics. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So part two of this is we're going to switch over, and this is research work in this field, which has a strange twist to it that you're going to see. So Robert Hartman asked the question, could he make ethics treat in a more scientific way? I, as an entrepreneur, asked another question. Can I make business more scientific? Now, axiology underlies both of them. So let's see what happened. So let's first off, let's put on our business hat and give business a reputable feel here. Not quite as noble as ethics, but pretty important. Nicolai Hartmann actually wrote about the value of economics. And so he said it's not only ethics that treats of values. The term value is conspicuous in economics and has its origin there. Right? He's crediting it with the origin of the word value. Economics is the study of goods, in the first place of material, then of vital, social, and mental goods of every kind. And to the latter are closely related the values of moral, legal, and political artistic life. So he's given a lot of credit there to economics. So to doing this little trip, we're going to do three concepts here. We're going to look at some bipolar stuff, but we're going to go into the world of Eastern philosophy. And then we're going to talk about something called value waves, and then we're going to extend to multiple agents. And you'll see how this fits in. When I was doing my study, since I was not into Western philosophy in any way, but was into Eastern philosophy, I picked, it's pretty famous, everybody knows yin and yang. I'm going to guess everybody's heard of that. And they represent a bipolar pair. Okay? And so what I did was I substituted in different words for yin and yang. So I substituted in yin being a state of need, and yang was a solution state. And there was a tension between the solution and the need. So you notice it's very similar to the finalistic nexus, right? Pretty much identical. Then there's the Tai Chi symbol. The Tai Chi symbol represents a harmony, right? So this is a solution state. So what I was doing with my business modeling was to take this bipolar situation and saying, hey, bring these two together, and now I have an axiom. Satisfaction is need fulfilled. Pretty simple, huh? Pretty powerful, but philosophically valid. Now this next step, this occurred probably 6, 7 years later. I made another bipolar substitution. I have a background in physics and mathematics, and so this assignment that I'm going to make would have not been available to Robert Hartman nor Nicolai Hartmann because it was ahead of their time. If you are familiar with physics, there's a positron and an electron. These are another pair of things. And it turns out a positron is antimatter. Now, you know, it sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Antimatter. But it's very real, I can assure you. So anybody ever heard of a PET scan? Positron emission tomography. So there's 2 Nobel Prizes that are going to be seen here. The first is a man named Carl Anderson got the Nobel Prize for even discovering the positron. Another man named Richard Feynman, who's a famous physicist, did this. He drew this picture, which are called Feynman diagrams. And he drew these kinds of diagrams so physicists could make calculations. So I was aware of this physics. And one day it struck me, well, gee, I wonder what would happen if I cross-fertilized my thinking with that one. And that's exactly what I did. And I said, well, if a need and a solution, you know, come together, what kind of wave do I have? What kind of wave do I have? It's not a gamma wave, right? It's a value wave, right? So I thought, well, gee, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if this will work out. Because if you're doing cross-fertilization like that, you don't really know what's going to come out. But as it turned out, it really worked out well for me. That's when I came up with this picture here, which is an extension of the basic diagram that we use, is to ought. Now we have value emission. So that's the value wave addition to the finalistic nexus. And then the next thing you have to do in business, it takes 2 to tango. And so you have to take the theory of this finalistic nexus stuff, and you have to get 2 agents. And so what do you name them? You know, a customer and a vendor, a receiver and a transmitter. You know, what do you do that? So actually, when I was naming these, I actually went to St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this in a religious sense, and he calls this the principal agent and the instrumental agent. So let's go through how this works. So here you are inside of this company, right? You're trying to move is to ought with the value output of your company, right? But you need an instrumental agent. You need somebody to provide you something that's going to be instrumental in moving you from here to here, right? So this is the instrumental agent. And really, you're both. Sometimes you're an instrumental agent, and sometimes you're a principal agent. You're really both. So this is taking the philosophy of the finalistic nexus into the business realm. So that leads with the depiction of the original thing by Nicolai Hartmann. Robert Hartman was big on this situational frame, adding that in. The work that I did had it built in because I was using the I Ching. The I Ching, if you don't know what it is, 64 situations. Right? 64 situations. So it already has the situational aspect of the problem built into it. And then if we add in the value waves, we wind up with this sort of picture. We move forward, we try to move the finalistic nexus forward and with the value wave. So what used to be a 3-fold is now a 5-fold if you add this in. So there's 5 things in that picture. There's really 6 because there's a yellow box. So whenever I'm doing this work, I always draw a yellow box behind whatever I'm working on. So this yellow box, what is that? What do I do with that yellow? I put in the yellow box everything I don't know. All right, this is a simplified model. So you guys all know a lot about a lot of things that I don't know. And plus there's a lot to be known that I don't know. So I always put that in the background just to remind myself, there's a lot I don't know. However, this model is a simplification that helps me in doing this kind of work and is in keeping with Robert Hartman's theory. So we do this every day. So let me explain the importance of adding this in. So I'll pick on Richard first. Can I pick on you? When Richard was telling his story the other day, we'll just pick any of them. I'll pick the vitamin one, right? You did vitamins. What was the name of those vitamins?
Vitamil.
Vitamil. So what did Richard do? Richard said, hey, he woke up one morning, right? And he says, I want to move is to ought. And then the next thing Richard had to do was figure out a path to get there, right? So this diagram fits Richard to a T. The next thing Richard had to do is take that plan and turn it into reality, right? He had to get the goods, which was the vitamins. But then what came next is really important, because then Richard had to figure out a way to distribute, right, those goods. But Richard still wouldn't be happy then. What did Richard have to do next? Those goods have to be assimilated. So this diagram shows goodness being distributed and then assimilated, right? So now we've come full circle. So that takes the threefold nexus to the end that Richard was looking for, right? Richard would not have been happy. If I had said, Richard, you got to stop right here, would you have been happy? Where'd you want to get? Right there. Now, what's really important about that is that when Richard got there, Richard received feedback. When Richard saw this happen, he went back to here and he goes, hey, my is thought works. I got it. I did it. So we can pick a number of other people. We can pick KT, for that matter, with her Rotary Club and getting rid of tuberculosis, right? Polio, sorry. So KT did the is the ought, their Rotary Club did it. And they figured out a plan, they implemented it, but look, they distributed that value was assimilated. And how many people have polio today?
Less than 100. We started.
Less than 100 people have polio. What process did KT use? This process.
KT didn't.
Well, KT's group did. KT's group did. But the point is this. This is a very simple process. And my goal is to develop axiology to the point a child could understand it. So my goal is this, that I can sit with a 10-year-old child, right? Now think about this. And this is a very visual picture. It's not very hard. I can explain it to a 10-year-old. I can sit them down and say, hey, this is the way you make the world a better place, right? Now, let's say I do this. I go into their world and I get them, hey, what ought to be? And how do you make it happen? And I take that child and I teach them this process. What have I done with that 10-year-old, right? How much more valuable is that to teach them than 2 + 2 is 4, right? So this is the kind of thing that I'm interested in, is developing educational materials in axiology that a child could understand. And adults, we can use it. I use this myself every day. So when I'm working on something, is Ron Price in the room? I don't think he is. Oh, there he is. Ron Price was, I listen to what everybody says. Everybody in this room is a person that does this process. We have a whole room full of people who know this. But how many of them taught it to a kid? Right? You learned all this. You did it. Right? Ron, the reason I picked on Ron was because I heard Ron emphatically say, when I see something, I think about it. And then when I decide, I commit. Didn't you say that?
Yep.
And what Ron is really saying, right? You are committing that whole process. You, Ron, have in your head that last step there. And if you can't see it, you probably won't commit. Is that true?
It's true.
True.
I don't want to get stuck in the middle of a trip.
You don't want, right. You don't want to go halfway. You want to go the whole way. So you learned that. I don't know at what age you learned that.
I could tell you about a lot of trips I never finished.
So, okay, so you got frustrated, right? So you didn't like to do that.
Yeah.
I've done it too. All of us have. So we all go through a learning process on this. But hey, why not teach it from the beginning? In my final slide here, I'm going to go back. This foretells Robert Hartman's future. This is simply a footnote in his paper done in 1948. Now, this is before Robert Hartman ever thought of good as concept fulfilled. Okay? As a footnote in this paper, I discovered that a woman named Ella Cabot wrote a book called Everyday Ethics. Right? You never heard of Ella Cabot, right? You never heard of her, but you heard of Robert Hartman. Look at what she said. Goodness is fitness, and fitness for a purpose. Things are good when they are fitted for a purpose for which they were meant. Goodness means fitness, whether we apply it to the word to goodness of man or to the goodness of anything. Anything is good when fitted for a purpose. Well, that's kind of like good as concept fulfilled. So really what Robert Hartman did, see, and you'll see this throughout philosophy. So if you start studying philosophy, you will find philosophers saying all sorts of things. But then another philosopher will come behind them and they'll say, hey, wait a minute. There's a gemstone sitting here. I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to run with it. And that's exactly what Robert Hartman did. And it was, I think, maybe 5 years later. Philosophers like to think about things for a while, right? They like to think about things for a while. So it wasn't, this sat on his brain and turned into good as concept fulfilled. Pretty interesting, huh? So now I think if you go back to Robert Hartman and you really see that his first love is revealed in his PhD dissertation in this article. And so what Robert Hartman really wanted was to be an ethicist. But he couldn't get there unless he first became an axiologist. But this reveals, really, since that ethics was his first true love, this explains why he would want to get rid of nuclear war. He took to heart this thing about changing these moral situations. So everywhere he looked, he saw these fields. He saw the ideal ethical field. And then he looked for these other places, where the fields just didn't line up and things didn't fit. And then he went after them. And regardless of whether it was in business or in politics. So that's the end of my presentation. Let's see, am I on time? I think I'm on time. Yeah.
By the way, I just applied your model to my type 2 diabetes.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Now it makes all kinds of sense.
Thank you.
Doug, it's so interesting how you hear these thoughts all coming together. And I've often thought that there are no new ideas in the world, just new recipes.
Right.
And our opportunity to contribute is by developing a new recipe like you did in your model.
Yes.
There's a very close similarity between Glasser's choice theory,
Yep.
where he talks about this is my perception, this is what I want, and
Yep.
this is the behavior that will close the gap.
Closing gaps is a big deal.
Yep. And then in Deming's Total Quality Management,
Yep.
he had something called SIPOC, which is your formula theory. It was this is the supplier and their inputs. This is the process where I create value to create this output for my customer.
Exactly.
It's the exact same
It's the
thing.
exact same thing. And really, if you look at that, that's business science. It's turning business into a science. It's real. In fact, there is a business science associated with this. There's a subject in economics called praxeology. And praxeology was Ludwig von Mises And guess what the axiom is for a practice? Now, this man built a whole economic system off of one axiom. Man will act, and man will act for a reason. That's it. That one statement.
Yep.
He built an entire economic system off of that one statement.
I have to apologize for my German.
Oh my golly, go ahead.
I'm concerned about the shadow side because one of the constructors of the concentration camps
Yes.
wasn't wasn't conscious that he was really guilty. And he said, I did good things. I had the purpose to create that camp.
Yeah, he was a
And he
logistics guy.
created a perfect structure
Yes.
which functioned.
I know exactly what you're talking. I read about the companies that built the ovens.
The shadow side of this, we know what is good about. And if I teach people good is concept fulfillment and neurotic and
Yes.
I would say evil leader says, I'm doing good. Goodness is fitness and fitness is for purpose. And my purpose,
That is exactly right.
was creating that concentration camp. And he did.
Well, that's, you hit upon a very important point because
What do we do with those people who
This
think
is-
this is goodness?
the process itself could be applied to good or bad. So for instance, let's say I'm an evil guy and I go, well, how am I going to really make some really bad, I'm going to blow up the world. I'm actually going to go through that same process,
Yeah.
right? What ought to be? Oh, things ought to really be bad. Oh, how am I going to get there? I'm going to bomb the World Trade Center. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get all those planes. I'm going to bring that to fruition. So this process is very powerful, obviously. And it could be used like anything else for good or bad.
That's why ethics is a subset
Yes.
of theology.
Yeah, that's right.
The goodness in people.
You're
Because the axiom of good has to do with defining whether or not something is fulfilling its concept,
Yep.
not whether or not that end concept or that end result is good or bad.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So you have to have the subset of ethics to apply it to people and to the things that relate to people, the environment, and all the other issues that have to do with ethics. But that wasn't really what I wanted to say. I want to say there's another piece of the background that ties into this in terms of Hartmann's synthesis, and that's Edmund Husserl,
Yep.
the phenomenology
Yes.
that was tied in with Nicolai Hartmann's
Yes.
thinking as well.
That's
Because that gave him the thinking about what is consciousness, what is experience, and the relationship between value and meaning. Which is, you see references to that in his writing, that value is meaning. And so it's that application that got expanded and synthesized into.
Right. And really, all this stuff that I put up here with Nicolai Hartmann, that would all come under the category of phenomenology.
Yeah.
Nicolai Hartmann was a phenomenologist, and what I put is phenomenology, what I added on. It comes under that category. Go ahead.
You know, what I liked about your yellow box illustration was where I think that in so many cases we miss the mark. You know, I worked for years with people losing weight, and they'd say, oh, the goal is I just need to lose weight. But what I love about the star at the end is what's the value?
Yep.
Why, and what does that mean for me as a person? And as long as I'm just reaching a goal on the scale, or I'm having a certain number reduced, whether it's weight or it's any other metric,
Yes.
that's not the point. The point is becoming
Yep,
something
that star at the
different
end, right?
At the end. And
Yep.
as you said, that could be something evil or something good. But the point is, who do I want to become? And is that part of the process of what we're doing as we teach and as we
Right.
learn for ourselves and those that we interact with?
Yep, that's true. Very true. Okay.